standing soaked outside that upscale restaurant at midnight, watching through rain-streaked windows as my son David and daughter-in-law Amanda laughed over dessert, I realized my life had become a cruel joke. 5 hours earlier, they had promised to pick me up after their quick dinner. My car was in the shop, and I had been waiting outside the mechanic's garage since 7 in the evening. When I finally called the restaurant, I heard Amanda's voice in the background saying, "Let her wait outside, she's fine." That was when I pulled out my phone and dialed my bank's 24-hour line. 3 days before that rainy night changed everything, I was bustling around my pristine ranch house in suburban Denver, preparing for David and Amanda's visit with their twin daughters, 8-year-olds Sarah and Emma. The afternoon sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as I arranged fresh flowers and checked the refrigerator for their favorite snacks. At 65 years old, I had spent most of my retirement years making sure my family felt welcome and supported. My story began decades earlier when my husband Robert died in a construction accident, leaving me to raise 12-year-old David alone. Those were brutal years. I worked double shifts as an elementary school principal, sacrificing sleep and my own comfort to ensure David never felt the absence of opportunities. Every penny went toward his future. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could have proper meals. I wore the same 3 dresses to work for 2 years so he could join the debate team and take violin lessons. When David graduated from law school summa cum laude, I felt like every sacrifice had been worthwhile. My modest teacher's pension combined with careful investments and Robert's life insurance money had grown over the years. By retirement, I had accumulated over $800,000. I lived, simply drove a reliable Honda Civic, and found my greatest joy in supporting my family's dreams. David had become a successful corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions. 3 years ago, he married Amanda, a former pharmaceutical sales representative who quit working after the twins were born. They lived in a beautiful colonial house in the most expensive neighborhood in town, complete with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped yard. What my son and his wife never quite grasped was how much of their lifestyle depended on my financial support. I covered the twins' private school tuition at Mountain View Academy, which cost $24,000 annually. I had provided the down payment for their house, a check for $150,000 that I handed over without hesitation. Over the years, I regularly transferred money for emergencies, Amanda's shopping expeditions, David's golf club membership, family vacations to Hawaii and Europe. Somehow these luxuries always became necessities that required my assistance. When Amanda arrived that afternoon with Sarah and Emma, I immediately sensed tension. She swept through my modest living room with barely concealed disdain, running her manicured fingers along my furniture and making pointed observations about my decorating choices. "This sofa is looking pretty worn, Becca," Amanda said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when offering unsolicited advice. "And these curtains are so outdated. You really should consider updating your space." I bit my tongue, focusing instead on the twins, who seemed unusually quiet. Normally, Sarah and Emma would race through the house excited to show me school projects or tell me about their activities. Today they sat politely on the edge of my couch, glancing nervously at their mother whenever they started to speak. Amanda continued her inspection, stopping in front of my dining room china cabinet, where I displayed the good dishes Robert and I had received as wedding gifts. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, claiming she wanted to help me catalog valuable items for insurance purposes. "You have some beautiful pieces here," she said, photographing my grandmother's pearl necklace and the silver tea set that had been in Robert's family for generations. "Have you ever had these appraised? You should really know their value." Something about her tone made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling aside. Amanda was family, and she was only trying to help. During lunch, she brought up the subject of my living situation, suggesting that my house was becoming too much for me to maintain. "David and I were discussing your future care needs," Amanda said, cutting her sandwich into precise triangles. "This house is really too big for one person, and the neighborhood is changing. Have you considered one of those lovely senior living communities? They handle all the maintenance, provide meals, and you would have people your own age to socialize with." The twins exchanged glances and Emma whispered something to Sarah that I could not catch. When I asked what she had said, Amanda quickly redirected the conversation. "The girls are just tired from their busy week," Amanda explained. "We have been teaching them about grown-up conversations and when it's appropriate for children to speak." After lunch, Amanda stepped onto my back patio to take a phone call. Through the sliding glass door, I could hear fragments of her conversation. "She won't live forever and David's too soft to handle it," Amanda said, her voice carrying clearly through the afternoon air. "We need to start thinking strategically about the timeline." My blood ran cold. I pretended to be cleaning the kitchen while straining to hear more, but Amanda noticed me listening and moved farther into the yard. When she returned, her demeanor had shifted back to the helpful daughter-in-law routine. That evening, after Amanda and the girls left, I found myself unable to shake the uneasiness that had settled in my chest. While cleaning up, I discovered that Amanda had left her jacket draped over one of my dining room chairs. When I picked it up to hang it properly, a folded piece of paper fell from the pocket. The paper was a printed email from someone named Marcus Daniels with the subject line, "Inheritance Acceleration Strategies." The content made my hands tremble as I read it. Marcus was discussing elderly financial incapacity procedures and timeline optimization for asset transfer. The email referenced the subject and mentioned a consultation fee of $15,000 for comprehensive family wealth transition services. I stared at the paper for a long time, reading it over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding something. But the language was clear, clinical, and terrifying. Someone was planning to take control of my money, and they were treating it like a business transaction. The next morning, I tried calling David to discuss the email, but he was rushing to court and could not talk. When I finally reached him that afternoon, his response made my heart sink. "Mom, you're overreacting," he said, his voice carrying that patient tone people use with confused elderly relatives. "Amanda was just researching general estate planning options. She wants to make sure you're protected as you get older. There's nothing wrong with being prepared." But I knew what I had read. The email was not about protecting me. It was about removing me from the equation entirely. That night, I lay awake wondering how long this plan had been in motion and how I had been so blind to what was happening around me. The following day, my Honda started making strange noises and died completely in the parking lot of the grocery store. When the tow truck driver examined the engine, he shook his head and said it would need major repairs. David was too busy with a big case to help, and Amanda grudgingly agreed to provide transportation, making it clear that chauffeur duties were a significant inconvenience. "I suppose we can work something out temporarily." Amanda sighed when I called to ask for a ride to my doctor's appointment. "But you really need to start thinking about whether you should still be driving at your age." During our first trip together, I noticed Amanda checking her phone, constantly texting someone whose contact name appeared as Marcus. When I casually asked who Marcus was, Amanda's response was vague and dismissive. "Just someone who helps with financial planning," she said. "David and I are trying to be more responsible about our long-term goals." But the pieces were starting to form a picture I did not want to see. Amanda was laying the groundwork for something, and my broken-down car was just another convenient piece of evidence that I was becoming dependent and unable to care for myself. The week after I discovered the email, Amanda launched what I would later recognize as a systematic campaign to make me appear confused and incompetent. It started with small contradictions that seemed innocent enough, but gradually built into a pattern that made me question my own memory. During a family dinner at their house, Amanda would ask me to repeat stories I had told the twins, then gently correct details that I was certain were accurate. "Grandma, I think you might be mixing up some facts," she would say sweetly in front of Sarah and Emma. "Last week you told us the school play was on Thursday, but today you said it was Friday. Which day is it really?" The twins would look confused, glancing between their mother and me with worried expressions. I began second-guessing everything I said, wondering if my memory was actually failing or if Amanda was deliberately distorting my words. Amanda started bringing a small notebook to our conversations, claiming she wanted to help me keep track of important dates and appointments. She would jot down everything I said occasionally, asking me to repeat information, just to make sure I have it right. When I mentioned that my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had fallen and hurt her hip, Amanda wrote it down. When I talked about my former teaching colleague retiring, Amanda recorded that too. I want to help you stay organized, Amanda explained when I asked about the notebook. Sometimes when we get older, it helps to have someone keeping track of the details. But Amanda's version of events never quite matched my memory. According to her notes, I had told her that Mrs. Patterson broke her arm, not her hip. I had supposedly said my colleague was moving to Florida, not simply retiring. Each discrepancy was small enough to dismiss individually, but together they painted a picture of someone whose grasp on reality was slipping. The campaign escalated when David called one evening asking for a large loan. He needed $50,000 immediately for unexpected medical expenses that he could not discuss in detail. When I asked what kind of medical situation required such a large sum so urgently, Amanda got on the phone, her voice breaking with carefully orchestrated emotion. "It's a very private matter, Becca." Amanda sobbed. "Female issues that I'm not comfortable discussing with everyone. The specialist wants payment up front and our insurance won't cover this particular treatment. Please, we wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary." Every instinct told me something was wrong with their story. David's voice sounded strained and rehearsed. Amanda's tears seemed calculated. But when your family claims they're facing a medical crisis, you don't ask for documentation. You help. Against my better judgment, I transferred the money to a new joint account that Amanda said was necessary for medical privacy purposes. The next week, Amanda's isolation tactics intensified. She began canceling our planned visits at the last minute, claiming the twins were sick or that David was too stressed for company. When I called to check on the family, my calls would go to voicemail during family time, which seemed to encompass most evenings and weekends. When I tried to visit unannounced, hoping to surprise the girls with homemade cookies, Amanda met me at the front door with an expression of polite but firm disapproval. "Becca, we've talked about this," she said, not inviting me inside. "David is under tremendous pressure at work right now, and unexpected visits just add to his stress. The girls are doing homework and we're trying to maintain their routine. Maybe you could call first next time." Through the doorway, I could see Sarah and Emma at the kitchen table looking up hopefully when they heard my voice. But Amanda quickly closed the door, leaving me standing on the porch with a container of chocolate chip cookies and a growing sense of isolation. Around the same time, Amanda began telling neighbors and acquaintances that I was having some memory issues and might show up confused or disoriented. Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 houses down from me, mentioned this conversation when I ran into her at the post office. "Amanda stopped by last week and wanted to give me your son's phone number," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "She seemed concerned about you living alone and said you might need help but be too proud to ask for it. She's such a thoughtful daughter-in-law to be looking out for you like that." I realized that Amanda was systematically undermining my reputation in the community, preparing people to see me as a confused elderly woman rather than the competent, independent person I had always been. She was building a narrative that would support whatever plan she had in motion. The psychological pressure intensified during our car rides together. Amanda would deliberately take wrong turns, then tell David that I had given her incorrect directions. She would ask me the same questions multiple times, then claim I was giving different answers each time. During one particularly unsettling trip to the pharmacy, she filmed our conversation on her phone, claiming she wanted to create memory books for the twins. "Becca, what year is it?" Amanda asked while the camera was rolling. "And can you tell me the names of your granddaughters?" The questions felt like a test, and the way Amanda framed them made me feel like I was being evaluated for competency. When I answered correctly, she would ask follow-up questions that seemed designed to confuse or fluster me. "Are you sure it's 2024? She would press. "Think carefully. Are you absolutely certain about that?" Amanda began keeping a journal that she claimed documented concerning behaviors for my own safety. She would write notes during our visits, occasionally reading entries aloud that described incidents I did not remember happening. "Last Tuesday, you left the front door unlocked," she would say, consulting her notebook. And on Friday, you asked me the same question 3 times during our phone conversation. I'm just keeping track of these things so we can discuss them with your doctor if needed. But I had not left my door unlocked, and I was certain I had not repeated myself during our phone call. Amanda was creating a false record of incompetence-building evidence for something I was beginning to understand but still hoped I was wrong about. The situation reached a new level of manipulation when Amanda started bringing Marcus Daniels to family gatherings. She introduced him as a family friend who helped with financial planning and long-term care issues. Marcus was a smooth-talking man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident smile that politicians and used car salesmen perfect over years of practice. "It's so smart of you to be thinking ahead," Marcus would tell me during these encounters. "Many families wait until there's a crisis to make these important decisions, but with proper planning, we can ensure that your golden years are comfortable and secure." Marcus would subtly question me about my living arrangements, my daily routines, and my ability to manage household tasks. His questions felt like a gentle interrogation designed to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. "Do you still drive everywhere yourself?" he would ask. "That's wonderful that you're maintaining your independence, although I imagine some situations must be challenging, night driving, for instance, or navigating construction zones." I began to dread these family gatherings where I felt like a specimen being studied, rather than a beloved family member being celebrated. Amanda and Marcus would exchange meaningful glances when they thought I was not looking, and I caught fragments of their conversations about timeline management and optimal transition strategies. The breaking point came when I discovered Amanda filming me during one of our visits, focusing the camera on moments when I paused to think or seemed momentarily confused about something minor. She was creating a documentary of my supposed decline, gathering evidence to support her narrative that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. When I confronted her about the filming, Amanda's response revealed just how calculated her campaign had become. "I'm just trying to help David understand what we're dealing with," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that had become her default when speaking to me. "He doesn't see you as often as I do, so he doesn't notice the changes. This will help him make informed decisions about your care." But I was not declining. I was being systematically undermined by someone who had been studying me like a predator studies prey, looking for weaknesses to exploit and opportunities to strike. The realization that my own family was plotting against me was devastating, but it was also clarifying. I finally understood what I was dealing with. Late one evening, as I sat in my kitchen reviewing everything that had happened over the past few months, I noticed Amanda's car parked outside a coffee shop near my neighborhood. Curious about why she would be in my area so late, I drove by and saw her through the window sitting intimately close to Marcus Daniels. They were not discussing financial planning. Amanda had her hand on his arm and he was stroking her hair. They were kissing with the passion of lovers, not the professional courtesy of client and advisor. Suddenly, everything made perfect sense. This was not just about my money. This was about Amanda's future with Marcus, funded by assets she planned to steal from me. I was not just being robbed. I was being eliminated to make room for someone else's love story. The cruelty of it took my breath away, but it also ignited something inside me that had been dormant for too long. I was done being a victim. Armed with the devastating knowledge of Amanda's affair, I decided to investigate Marcus Daniels more thoroughly. My years as a school principal had taught me how to research difficult parents and uncover information that people preferred to keep hidden. I spent the next several days using every resource available to dig into Marcus's background. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Marcus Daniels was not just unethical. He was a career criminal who specialized in targeting vulnerable elderly clients. Public records showed that he had been fired from his previous financial advisory firm for fraudulent practices. Court documents revealed his involvement in 3 previous cases where elderly clients had been declared incompetent and their assets transferred to family members under his guidance. The pattern was always the same. Marcus would befriend families facing potential inheritance situations, then work with manipulative relatives to systematically isolate and discredit elderly individuals. In each case, the family members paid Marcus substantial consulting fees after gaining control of the accounts. Most disturbing of all, every one of his previous elderly victims had died within 2 years of losing their financial independence, isolated and broken by the betrayal of their own families. I was staring at a blueprint for my own destruction executed by professionals who had perfected this scheme through practice. The documentation campaign, the gaslighting, the medical emergencies, even the car trouble. Everything was carefully orchestrated to create the appearance that I was becoming dependent and incompetent. My investigation revealed that Marcus had been involved with Amanda for much longer than I had realized. Phone records showed their communication dating back over 2 years long before Amanda had started her campaign against me. This meant that David's entire marriage was built on a foundation of planned theft. Amanda had not fallen in love and then gotten greedy. She had targeted my son specifically because she knew about my financial assets. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Amanda had spent 2 years studying my routines, my relationships, and my vulnerabilities. She had identified my deep love for my family as the weakness that could be exploited. She knew that I would sacrifice anything for David and the twins, even my own well-being. But knowing about the affair and the broader scheme still did not prepare me for what happened next. On a Thursday evening, Amanda called with a tone of sweet concern that I now recognized as manipulation. "Becca, David, and I would like to take you out to dinner tomorrow night," she said. "We want to talk about family matters and discuss some important decisions about your future. We've made reservations at Romano's, that lovely Italian place downtown that you always enjoy." The invitation felt like a trap, but I could not refuse without raising suspicions. Romano's was indeed one of my favorite restaurants, a place where David and I had celebrated his law school graduation and other family milestones. If Amanda was planning something, at least it would happen in a public setting where she could not manipulate the situation too dramatically. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, though every instinct told me to be cautious. "What time should I meet you there?" "Actually, we're going to pick you up," Amanda said quickly. "Your car is still in the shop and we don't want you to have to worry about transportation. We'll collect you around 7 o'clock. But Friday afternoon, Amanda called with a change of plans. She explained that she and David needed to attend a brief business meeting before dinner, something that had come up unexpectedly. They would still take me to Romano's, but they needed me to wait at the mechanic's shop while they handled their obligation first. "We'll pick you up right after our meeting," Amanda promised. "It shouldn't take more than an hour and then we'll have a lovely dinner together. The shop owner said you're welcome to wait inside if you'd like." I agreed, though. Something about the arrangement felt strange. Why would they schedule a business meeting on the same evening they had planned a family dinner? And why couldn't they simply pick me up later after their meeting was finished? Friday evening, I arrived at Murphy's Auto Repair at 7 o'clock as instructed. The shop was already closed for the day and the owner was locking up as I approached. When I explained that my son was supposed to pick me up there, he looked confused. "Nobody mentioned anything about a pickup," he said. "But you're welcome to wait out front. There's a small awning that should keep you dry if the weather turns bad." The evening was overcast with the kind of heavy clouds that promised rain before midnight. I settled into a plastic chair under the narrow awning, confident that David and Amanda would arrive shortly. Surely their business meeting would not last very long. But 8 o'clock came and went with no sign of my family. I called David's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Amanda's number and received a text message saying they were running a little late, but would be there soon. By 9 o'clock, a light drizzle had started and the temperature was dropping. The awning provided minimal protection from the wind-driven moisture, and I found myself getting progressively wetter and colder. I called again and received another text promising they would arrive any minute now. Other families were being picked up from nearby businesses as the evening progressed, and I watched them drive away with growing anxiety. The security guard from a neighboring office building noticed me sitting alone and approached with genuine concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. "You've been out here for quite a while and it's getting pretty nasty out here." My pride prevented me from accepting help from a stranger. This was my family, and they would come for me. There had to be a reasonable explanation for the delay, but as 10 o'clock approached and the drizzle turned into steady rain, I began to suspect that something more sinister was happening. The area around the auto shop was gradually emptying out as businesses closed and employees went home. I was becoming increasingly isolated, sitting alone in the dark under a small awning that was no match for the intensifying storm. My clothes were soaked, my phone battery was dying, and I was starting to shiver uncontrollably. Around 11 o'clock, desperation overcame my pride, and I decided to call Romano's directly. If David and Amanda were still in their meeting, perhaps the restaurant could give them a message. When the hostess answered, I explained that I was trying to reach my family who should be dining there. "Could you check if you have a reservation under David Thompson?" I asked, shouting over the sound of rain drumming on the metal awning. "Thompson, yes, here it is," the hostess replied. "They're at table 12. Would you like me to get them for you?" My heart lifted with relief. They were there probably wondering where I was and worried about my absence. But when the hostess returned to the phone, her words shattered my remaining illusions about my family's intentions. In the background, I could hear voices clearly enough to recognize David and Amanda's conversation with the hostess. Amanda's voice carried across the restaurant as she responded to the request to take a call from Becca. "Tell her we already left," Amanda said loudly enough for other diners to hear. "Let her wait outside. She's getting too dependent anyway. This will teach her that we have our own lives to live." David's voice added to the cruelty. "She needs to learn that we can't drop everything every time she wants attention. Maybe sitting out there for a while will help her understand that." The hostess came back on the line, clearly uncomfortable with delivering a lie. "I'm sorry, but they say they've already left the restaurant." But I had heard the truth. My son and daughter-in-law were inside warm and comfortable, deliberately leaving me in a storm as some kind of twisted lesson about dependence. They had planned this entire evening to humiliate and endanger me, to demonstrate their power over my life and my well-being. As I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with cold and rage, I saw a couple through the restaurant's rain-streaked window, raising champagne glasses in a toast. Amanda and David were celebrating something, their faces flushed with wine and satisfaction. At their table was a third person, Marcus Daniels, with papers spread in front of him that looked suspiciously like legal documents. They were not having a family dinner to discuss my future. They were finalizing the paperwork for my destruction while I sat in a storm like a discarded pet. The cruelty was breathtaking, but it was also clarifying. I finally understood exactly who I was dealing with and what they were capable of. Sitting in that cold rain, watching my family celebrate my humiliation, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and confusion that had dominated my thoughts for months crystallized into cold, clear determination. I was done being their victim. I was done being manipulated, gaslit, and discarded. I pulled out my phone one last time, but this call was not to David or Amanda. I dialed my bank's 24-hour customer service line, and when Janet Morrison, a night supervisor I had worked with for years, answered the phone, I spoke with absolute clarity and purpose. "Janet, this is Becca Thompson. I need to place fraud alerts on all my accounts and revoke any previously authorized access immediately. I believe my assets are being targeted for theft." As I spoke those words, lightning illuminated the restaurant window behind me, revealing Amanda laughing as she leaned against Marcus's shoulder. The symbolism was not lost on me. The storm was washing away my illusions, but it was also revealing my strength. Janet Morrison's professional voice carried genuine concern as she processed my late-night request. As a longtime customer with substantial accounts, I had always received excellent service from the bank, but tonight felt different. Janet seemed to understand the urgency in my voice without requiring extensive explanations. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm showing several accounts with authorized secondary access," she said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "Are you requesting removal of all additional account holders?" "Yes, immediately," I replied, my voice steady despite the rain soaking through my jacket. I I want David Thompson and Amanda Thompson removed from all accounts effective right now, and I need to place fraud alerts on everything. Janet walked me through the security protocols, confirming my identity with questions that only I could answer. Within 15 minutes, every account that David and Amanda had access to was frozen. Their debit cards would be declined. Their automatic transfers would be rejected. The financial foundation of their lifestyle would disappear the moment they tried to access it. But I was not finished. While Janet remained on the line, I transferred $720,000 to a new account at a completely different bank, one that my son and daughter-in-law did not even know existed. I left exactly $5,000 in our shared accounts, enough to avoid overdraft fees, but nowhere near enough to maintain their current standard of living. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a substantial transfer," Janet said carefully. "Are you certain you want to proceed with moving these funds tonight?" I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I told her, watching Amanda and Marcus through the restaurant window as they examined documents that undoubtedly concerned my financial destruction. After completing the banking transactions, I called Yellow Cab and requested a ride home. As I waited for the taxi, I placed another crucial call to my late husband's brother, Frank Patterson, a retired police detective who lived 2 states away but had always told me to reach out if I ever needed help. Frank answered on the second ring, immediately alert despite the late hour. When I explained my situation, his response was swift and decisive. "Becca, what you're describing sounds like organized elder abuse," he said, his professional instincts taking over. "The isolation tactics, the financial manipulation, the documentation of supposed incompetence. This is a textbook case. You need legal representation immediately." Frank gave me the contact information for Patricia Wells, a family law attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and financial fraud. He also provided guidance that would prove invaluable in the coming days. "Document everything," Frank instructed. "Keep records of every phone call, every conversation, every attempt at manipulation. These people are criminals, and criminals make mistakes when they think they're winning." The taxi arrived as I was ending my conversation with Frank, and during the 20-minute ride home, I began organizing my thoughts and planning my next moves. The scared, confused woman who had waited in that rain no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood exactly what was happening and had the resources to fight back. Back home, I changed into dry clothes and spread every piece of evidence I had collected across my dining room table. The hotel receipts proving Amanda's affair with Marcus, the email about inheritance acceleration strategies, bank statements showing every transfer I had made to David and Amanda over the past 5 years, credit card bills in David's name that I had never seen before, Amanda's notebook pages that I had photographed while she was distracted. The total amount I had given them was staggering $253,000 over 5 years. Tuition payments, house down payment, emergency loans, vacation funding, credit card payments. The list went on and on. I had been financing my own destruction, paying for the very lifestyle that allowed Amanda and Marcus to plot against me. While organizing the evidence, I discovered something else, a spare key to David's house that I had forgotten about, given to me years earlier in case of emergencies. For the first time, I wondered what other evidence might be waiting in their home, hidden in plain sight. My phone started ringing around midnight. The first call was from David, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Amanda called, then David again. By morning, I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages chronicling their growing panic as they discovered their financial access had disappeared. The messages started with confusion. "Mom, the account seems to be frozen. There must be some mistake." They escalated to irritation. "This is ridiculous. Call the bank first thing in the morning and straighten this out." By dawn, they had reached desperation. "Please call back. We need to talk about this situation immediately." But I was not ready to talk to them yet. First, I had calls to make and preparations to complete. At 8 o'clock sharp, I called Patricia Wells' office and was able to schedule an emergency consultation for that afternoon. Her assistant mentioned that Frank Patterson had already called to provide background on my case, which would expedite our meeting. Next, I called my insurance company to document the theft of my spare house key, establishing a paper trail that might become important later. I photographed every piece of evidence from multiple angles, uploaded everything to cloud storage, and created backup copies that I stored in my safety deposit box. During my consultation with Patricia Wells, I learned that what Amanda and Marcus had been planning constituted serious criminal activity. The forged documents, the systematic isolation, the financial manipulation, everything added up to organized elder abuse that carried significant legal penalties. Mrs. Thompson, the documentation you've gathered is extraordinary, Patricia said as she reviewed my evidence. Most elder abuse cases involve family members acting impulsively out of greed. What you're describing is a sophisticated long-term scheme designed to systematically strip away your autonomy and assets. Patricia explained that the kind of comprehensive documentation Amanda had been creating was typically used to support conservatorship petitions. Once a court declared me incompetent, Amanda and David would have complete control over my finances, my living arrangements, and even my medical care. The timeline suggests they were planning to file within the next few weeks, Patricia continued. Your intervention tonight may have prevented a legal proceeding that would have been very difficult to reverse once it was in motion. But Patricia also delivered sobering news about the broader implications of my discovery. The scheme I had uncovered was likely not Amanda and Marcus's first attempt. The sophistication of their approach suggested they had done this before, which meant there were probably other families who had fallen victim to the same tactics. We need to contact the district attorney's office, Patricia advised. This case has implications beyond your personal situation. If we can prove a pattern of elder abuse, we might be able to help other families who have suffered similar losses. As I left Patricia's office armed with legal representation and a clear understanding of my rights, I felt a sense of empowerment that had been absent for months. I was no longer a confused elderly woman being manipulated by her family. I was a competent adult taking control of a criminal situation. That evening, as I prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming, I made one more discovery that revealed just how close I had come to complete disaster. While reviewing Amanda's photographed journal entries, I found a page dated just 3 days in the future. Amanda had already scheduled the filing of preliminary conservatorship documents, claiming that I had severe cognitive decline and needed immediate financial protection. According to her timeline, I would have been declared incompetent within 30 days, with all my assets transferred to a guardianship account managed by David and Amanda. The rain-soaked night outside Romano's was not just a cruel prank. It was the final test to confirm that I was isolated, dependent, and ready for the legal proceedings that would strip away my independence forever. But now armed with evidence and legal representation, I was ready for the fight of my life. When David and Amanda arrived at my door the next morning, they would discover that the helpless elderly woman they had been manipulating no longer existed. In her place was someone who knew exactly what they had been planning and had taken steps to ensure it would never happen. David and Amanda arrived at my front door at 7 o'clock sharp the next morning, their faces showing a mixture of panic and barely controlled anger. Through my peephole, I could see them whispering urgently to each other before David knocked. When I opened the door, their contrasting approaches to the crisis immediately became apparent. Amanda launched into her sweetest voice, the one she used when she needed something important. "Becca, we were so worried about you last night," she said, pushing past me into the living room. "We looked everywhere for you. When we couldn't find you at the restaurant, we thought something terrible had happened." David followed behind her, his lawyer training evident in his more direct approach. "Mom, there's obviously been some kind of mistake with the bank accounts. You need to call them immediately and straighten this out. Our mortgage payment is due today, and the twins' tuition is scheduled to auto-transfer on Monday." I closed the door calmly and turned to face them, noting how differently they looked when they were the ones feeling vulnerable and desperate. Amanda's perfectly styled hair showed signs of hasty preparation, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer purse. David's usually confident demeanor had cracked, revealing the anxiety beneath his professional facade. "There's no mistake," I said, simply settling into my favorite armchair and gesturing for them to sit on the couch. "I froze the accounts deliberately. I also transferred my money to a new bank where you have no access." The silence that followed my words was profound. Amanda's mask of concern slipped completely, revealing the calculating expression I had glimpsed so many times before. David looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility that I might take control of my own finances had never occurred to him. "You can't just cut off your own family without warning," Amanda said, her voice rising to a pitch that would have awakened the neighbors if they had been closer. "This kind of erratic behavior is exactly what we've been concerned about. You're proving that you need help managing these decisions." "I'm proving that I'm smarter than you gave me credit for," I replied, opening the evidence folder I had prepared for this moment. "And I know exactly what you've been planning." I began laying out the documents methodically, the same way I used to present evidence to parents whose children had been caught cheating or bullying. The hotel receipts from Amanda and Marcus's affair, the printed email about inheritance acceleration strategies, the photographs of Amanda's journal entries documenting fake incidents of confusion and incompetence. David's face went pale as he recognized the scope of evidence I had accumulated. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you explain this?" I asked, showing him the forged conservatorship documents that I had discovered among Amanda's papers. "These have your signature, David. You were planning to have me declared incompetent and take control of all my assets." Amanda immediately went on the offensive, her voice taking on the aggressive tone she used when cornered. "Those are just precautionary measures," she snapped. "Marcus explained that it's standard practice to have these documents prepared in advance. We weren't going to use them unless it became absolutely necessary." "Necessary for what?" I asked. "Necessary for stealing $800,000. Necessary for putting me in a nursing home so you could spend my money on your lifestyle and your affair." The mention of the affair hit Amanda like a physical blow. Her face flushed red, and for the first time since I had known her, she seemed at a loss for words. David looked confused, clearly unaware of his wife's relationship with Marcus. "What affair?" David asked, looking between Amanda and me with growing comprehension. I placed the hotel receipts and restaurant bills on the coffee table, along with photographs I had taken of Amanda and Marcus kissing in the coffee shop parking lot. "Your wife has been having a relationship with Marcus Daniels for over 2 years, I said quietly. "This entire scheme was designed to fund their life together after they destroyed mine." David stared at the evidence with the expression of someone whose entire world was collapsing. "Amanda, is this true?" Amanda's response revealed the depth of her manipulation and contempt for my son. "Marcus understands me in ways you never could," she said with vicious honesty. "He has vision and ambition. You're too weak to make the hard decisions that successful people have to make." The cruelty in her words seemed to awaken something in David that had been dormant throughout their marriage. For the first time, he was seeing his wife's true nature, and the recognition was devastating. "You used me," David said slowly. "You married me to get access to my mother's money." "I married you because you were a useful cover," Amanda replied, her mask completely gone now. "David, you've been living in a fantasy. Your mother's money has been supporting our lifestyle for years. Without her accounts, we have nothing. The house, the cars, the kids' school, everything depends on her continuing to subsidize our lives." David turned to me with an expression of genuine remorse and horror. "Mom, I had no idea it had gone this far. I thought we were just planning ahead, making sure you had proper care as you got older." "Did you think proper care included leaving me in a rainstorm for 5 hours while you celebrated inside a warm restaurant?" I asked. David's face crumpled as he realized the full extent of what had been done in his name. "We told you we had already left. You said to let me wait outside because I was getting too dependent," I finished for him. I heard every word. But Amanda was not finished destroying the relationships around her. Faced with exposure and the collapse of her plans, she decided to burn everything down. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice filled with venom. "Your precious son has been a pathetic disappointment from the beginning. Do you know why he really agreed to this plan? Because he's weak and guilty and desperate for someone to take care of him the way you always have." Amanda pulled out her phone and began scrolling through text messages. "David has been drowning in debt for 3 years. His gambling addiction, which you apparently don't know about, has cost us over $60,000. The medical emergency, we needed $50,000 for that was to cover his losses to a bookie who was threatening legal action." David looked at me with shame and terror. "Mom, I can explain about that. I got in over my head, but I was getting help." "The only help you were getting," Amanda continued ruthlessly, "was from me and Marcus, who saw an opportunity to turn your weakness into profit. David knew about the conservatorship papers. He signed them willingly because he thought they would solve all his problems." The revelations were coming so fast that I could barely process them. My son was a gambling addict who had been manipulated into betraying me. My daughter-in-law was a sociopath who had orchestrated the entire scheme for her own benefit. And Marcus was a career criminal who specialized in destroying families for profit. But in the midst of this devastating exposure, something unexpected happened. The front door opened and Marcus Daniels walked into my living room as if he owned the place. "What's taking so long?" Marcus demanded, clearly irritated that the morning's mission had not been completed. Did she sign the restoration documents or not? The sight of Marcus triggered the final piece of clarity I needed. This man had been planning to destroy my life, and he was so confident in his scheme that he felt comfortable walking into my home uninvited. "Mr. Daniels," I said calmly, "you're trespassing. I'm going to need you to leave my property immediately." Marcus laughed a sound filled with arrogance and contempt. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you misunderstand the situation. Your family has asked me to help resolve this unfortunate confusion about your accounts. Once we get this sorted out, we can move forward with the proper arrangements for your care." It was then that I realized Marcus had no idea how much I knew about his background and his relationship with Amanda. He was still operating under the assumption that I was a confused elderly woman who could be intimidated into compliance. "I understand the situation perfectly," I said, picking up my phone. "I understand that you're a convicted fraudster who was fired from your previous firm for elder abuse. I understand that you've been having an affair with my daughter-in-law for 2 years while planning to steal my money, and I understand that you're about to be arrested for criminal conspiracy." Marcus's confident expression faltered as he realized that his cover was completely blown. But instead of retreating, he doubled down on intimidation, apparently believing that aggression could still salvage the situation. "You can't prove any of those allegations," Marcus said, stepping closer to where I sat. "And even if you could, who's going to believe a confused old woman over established financial professionals?" That was when Marcus made his fatal mistake. He pulled out a folder of legal documents and threw them on my coffee table with enough force to scatter my carefully organized evidence. "These are restoration papers that will give your family proper authority to manage your affairs," Marcus announced. "You're going to sign them right now, or we're going to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation based on this morning's erratic behavior." But Marcus had no idea that I had been recording our entire conversation on my phone and that Patricia Wells was listening to every word from her office through a conference call connection I had established before David and Amanda arrived. The sound of police sirens in the distance marked the beginning of the end for Marcus Daniels and his conspiracy. Patricia had contacted law enforcement the moment Marcus had made his threats, and they were now approaching my house to arrest him on outstanding warrants related to his previous elder abuse cases. As Marcus realized that his scheme was collapsing around him, he made one final attempt to manipulate the situation by throwing Amanda completely under the bus. "This whole thing was her idea," Marcus said, pointing at Amanda with desperation. "She approached me about targeting her mother-in-law. She provided all the information about the accounts and the family dynamics. I was just providing professional consultation. Amanda's response revealed the depth of the betrayal that had destroyed my family. Marcus, you promised me that we could be together after this was finished. You said David would never have to know, and that Becca would be properly cared for in a facility. But it was too late for blame shifting and damage control. The police were at my front door, and I had enough evidence to ensure that both Marcus and Amanda would face serious criminal charges for their conspiracy against me. The next several hours unfolded like scenes from a crime drama, except the victim was not lying in a pool of blood, but sitting safely in her own living room watching justice arrive at her front door. Detective Rosa Martinez and her partner Detective James Sullivan entered my home with the practiced efficiency of officers who had handled many financial fraud cases. Detective Martinez immediately took control of the situation, while Detective Sullivan began documenting evidence. Marcus Daniels was the first to be handcuffed, and his arrest revealed the scope of the investigation that had been building around him for months. As Detective Martinez read him his rights, she explained that my case was part of a larger inquiry into organized elder abuse schemes operating across 3 counties. Mr. Daniels, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and violation of your probation terms from the Williams case in Jefferson County. Detective Martinez announced, "You have the right to remain silent." As Marcus was led away, he made one final attempt to implicate Amanda and David as the primary conspirators. "Check her phone records," he shouted back toward my living room. "She's been planning this for 2 years. I was just providing consultation services." Amanda's arrest followed quickly, with Detective Sullivan explaining that her charges would include forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. As they handcuffed her, Amanda's demeanor shifted from defiance to panic. "This is a mistake," Amanda pleaded with the officers. "I'm a mother of 2 small children. I was just trying to help my family plan for the future. My husband can explain everything." But David was facing his own legal jeopardy. While he was not arrested immediately, Detective Martinez explained that his cooperation with the investigation would determine whether he faced charges as an accessory to the conspiracy. "Mr. Thompson, the documents show your signature on several questionable forms," Detective Martinez said. "We're going to need you to come to the station for questioning later this afternoon." David looked at me with an expression of complete defeat. "Mom, I never intended for it to go this far. I thought we were just preparing for the future, making sure you'd be taken care of." "David, you signed papers that would have allowed them to have me declared incompetent and steal my life savings," I said quietly. "Whether you intended it or not, that's what you agreed to do." As the police completed their initial investigation at my house, the broader implications of Marcus and Amanda's arrest began to emerge. Detective Sullivan explained that their scheme had been much larger than I had realized. "Mrs. Thompson, we've been tracking Mr. Daniels for 8 months, Detective Sullivan said. "Your case is the 4th family we know about, but there may be others. The financial damage across all the cases exceeds $2 million. The investigation revealed that Marcus and Amanda had been operating their scheme like a business with Amanda, using her pharmaceutical sales experience to identify targets, and Marcus providing the legal framework for asset theft. They had developed a sophisticated system for isolating elderly victims and manipulating their families into supporting conservatorship proceedings. Patricia Wells arrived as the police were finishing their initial evidence collection, bringing with her additional documentation that she had prepared overnight. Her research had uncovered the full scope of Marcus's criminal history and his connection to a network of corrupt advisors operating throughout the region. "Becca, the district attorney's office wants to use your case as the foundation for a broader prosecution," Patricia explained. "Your documentation is the most comprehensive evidence they've seen of how these schemes operate." But while justice was being served on a legal level, the personal destruction was just beginning. With Amanda in jail and facing serious felony charges, The financial house of cards that supported David's lifestyle collapsed completely. The mortgage payment on their house bounced, triggering an immediate default notice from the bank. Without access to my accounts, David could not make the payment that would have prevented foreclosure proceedings from beginning. The twins' private school Mountain View Academy called that afternoon to inform David that tuition payments had been declined and that Sarah and Emma would be expelled unless the account was brought current within 48 hours. The total amount due, including late fees, was over $12,000. Credit card companies began calling within hours of Amanda's arrest as automated systems detected the legal issues and flagged their accounts for review. David learned for the first time that Amanda had accumulated over $80,000 in debt, using credit cards that she had opened in his name without his knowledge. David's law firm Meridian Associates placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. His managing partner explained that clients were already expressing concern about their firm's association with financial fraud allegations, and David's continued employment would depend on clearing his name completely. The social destruction followed quickly behind the financial collapse. Amanda's position as social chairwoman of their neighborhood association was terminated immediately when news of her arrest spread through the community. Parents of the twins' classmates began canceling playdates and excluding Sarah and Emma from social events. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came when police searched David and Amanda's house and discovered evidence of the systematic campaign they had waged against me. Amanda's home office contained detailed files on my daily routines, my financial accounts, my health information, and my social connections. Detective Martinez showed me photographs from Amanda's planning materials, including a timeline that mapped out the 18-month process they had designed to isolate me and gain control of my assets. The level of detail was breathtaking and horrifying. She had your grocery shopping schedule, your medical appointments, your banking routines, Detective Martinez explained. She knew when you were most vulnerable and planned their manipulations around your emotional state and physical needs. Among Amanda's files, investigators found evidence that she had been researching residential memory care facilities, apparently planning to have me committed to institutional care once they gained legal control over my decisions. The facilities she had identified were all over 100 miles away from Denver, ensuring that I would be completely isolated from any friends or community connections that might advocate for my well-being. Most disturbing of all, Amanda's notes revealed that she had been researching my medical history and had contacted a corrupt doctor about fabricating a dementia diagnosis. Dr. Kenneth Walsh, who was already under investigation by the State Medical Board for insurance fraud, had agreed to provide documentation supporting incompetency proceedings in exchange for a fee of $25,000. The timeline showed that Amanda and Marcus had planned to complete their theft within 6 months of the conservatorship being established. Once my assets were transferred to accounts they controlled, they intended to liquidate everything and disappear, leaving David to deal with the legal consequences alone. When David learned about this final betrayal, something inside him seemed to break completely. The realization that his wife had planned to abandon him after destroying our family was more than he could process. "She was going to leave me with nothing," David said, staring at Amanda's planning documents with disbelief. "After I helped her do this to you, she was planning to take everything and disappear with Marcus." But David's shock at Amanda's betrayal could not undo the damage that had been done to our relationship. As I watched my son confront the full scope of his wife's manipulation, I felt a complex mixture of sympathy and anger that would take a long time to resolve. The twins, Sarah and Emma, were the innocent victims in this entire situation. When Child Protective Services became involved due to Amanda's incarceration, temporary custody was arranged with David, but under supervised conditions that reflected the family's instability. Patricia Wells explained that my role in the twins' lives would need to be carefully managed during the legal proceedings. The court will want to ensure that the children's relationships with their grandmother are healthy and appropriate given everything that's happened. As the day ended and the last of the police officers left my house, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. The documents and photographs told the story of a sophisticated criminal scheme, but they also revealed the depth of betrayal by people I had loved and trusted without reservation. The woman who had waited in the rain 2 nights earlier would not have believed that she possessed the strength to bring down a criminal conspiracy and protect herself from predators who had disguised themselves as family. But that woman no longer existed. In her place was someone who had learned that love without boundaries is not love at all, but an invitation for exploitation. The real work of rebuilding my life was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own future. The criminals who had targeted me were facing justice, and I had the resources and support to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen to me again. 6 months after that rainy night changed everything, I sat in my newly remodeled home office, reviewing the final legal documents that restored complete control of my finances and established my independence more firmly than ever before. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was someone I recognized, strong, confident, and free from the manipulation that had nearly destroyed my life. The legal victory had been swift and comprehensive. Amanda pleaded guilty to charges of elder abuse forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud, receiving a sentence of 3 years in state prison. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected the court's view of the crime's severity. Mrs. Thompson, your systematic campaign to defraud and abuse an elderly family member represents a particularly cruel form of betrayal, Judge Patricia Hendricks had said. You exploited the natural love between a mother and son to facilitate your criminal conspiracy. Marcus Daniels received a 7-year sentence for multiple counts of elder abuse, spanning several cases, and his conviction helped bring justice to other families who had suffered similar losses. The investigation revealed that Marcus's schemes had defrauded elderly victims of over $2.4 million across 4 states. David avoided prison time through his cooperation with the prosecution, but his punishment included 200 hours of community service and mandatory counseling to address both his gambling addiction and his role in the conspiracy. More importantly, David had to confront the reality of how his weakness and guilt had been exploited to harm the person who had sacrificed everything for his success. Mom, I spent my whole adult life feeling guilty about Dad's death and trying to prove I was worthy of your sacrifices, David told me during one of our supervised meetings. Amanda recognized that guilt and used it to manipulate me into betraying you. I'm not making excuses, but I want you to understand how it happened. The financial recovery exceeded my expectations. Not only did I recover all stolen funds, but Amanda's seized assets and Marcus's restitution payments actually increased my total net worth to over $900,000. I hired Margaret Foster, a reputable financial advisor who specialized in protecting seniors from fraud, to help manage my investments and establish safeguards against future exploitation. Together, we created a comprehensive trust that would ensure my assets would be properly managed if I ever became incapacitated, with multiple independent trustees and strict oversight requirements that would prevent any single person from gaining unauthorized control over my finances. The trust specifically excluded anyone with a criminal record from accessing funds, ensuring that Amanda could never again threaten my financial security. But money was not the most important thing I had recovered. My confidence had returned stronger than ever, and I was no longer the isolated, dependent woman that Amanda had tried to create. I returned to substitute teaching at the elementary school, where I had spent my career finding renewed purpose in educating children and using my experience to help other teachers recognize signs of family dysfunction. The school district asked me to develop a presentation about elder abuse prevention, which I delivered to parent groups and community organizations throughout the Denver area. Sharing my story helped other families recognize manipulation tactics and protected vulnerable seniors from similar schemes. The most important thing to understand I would tell audiences, is that these criminals succeed by making you feel ashamed of your suspicions. They want you to think that questioning family members makes you paranoid or ungrateful. But protecting yourself is not selfish. It's necessary for being able to genuinely help the people you love. My volunteer work expanded beyond education to include direct support for elder abuse victims. I partnered with the district attorney's office to provide peer counseling for seniors who had experienced financial manipulation, helping them understand that the shame belonged to the criminals, not to the victims. The personal transformation was just as important as the professional growth. I took a senior citizen self-defense class and learned to trust my instincts again. The teacher, a former police officer named Captain Rita Santos, helped me understand that my survival was not a matter of luck, but a result of intelligence and courage. Mrs. Thompson, you survived because you recognized the warning signs and took action. Captain Santos told me after class one evening. Many people in your situation would have ignored their instincts and suffered the consequences. You chose to fight back, and that choice saved your life. My relationship with David required careful rebuilding, complicated by the fact that his children were still part of our family, despite their mother's crimes. David entered intensive therapy to understand how his unresolved grief and guilt had made him vulnerable to manipulation. Our conversations were painful but necessary. I never properly mourned Dad's death. David admitted during one of our family counseling sessions. I felt guilty that he died working to support us, and I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth his sacrifice. Amanda saw that guilt and convinced me that supporting her schemes was a way of protecting you from making bad decisions. The twins, Sarah and Emma, were the priority in our family's healing process. They spent weekends with me while David worked to stabilize his life and address his gambling addiction. The girls had been deeply affected by the secrets and manipulation they had witnessed, but children are remarkably resilient when they feel safe and loved. "Grandma, are we allowed to tell you about school now?" Emma asked during one of our early visits together. Mom said family business had to stay private, but we didn't understand what that meant. Helping the girls process their feelings about their mother's absence required patience and professional guidance. We participated in family counseling to ensure that Sarah and Emma could understand the situation in age-appropriate ways without being burdened by adult responsibilities or guilt. The community support that emerged after my story became public was overwhelming and healing. My former teaching colleagues organized support groups for families affected by financial abuse, and my church congregation created educational programs to help seniors recognize and prevent elder abuse. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who had been warned by Amanda about my supposed memory problems, became one of my strongest allies in community education efforts. "I feel terrible that I didn't question what Amanda told me," she said. "If we had all been more aware of these tactics, maybe we could have helped you sooner." The neighborhood that had once whispered about my cognitive decline now saw me as someone who had survived a sophisticated criminal attack and emerged stronger than before. My story helped other families recognize that elder abuse often comes from within families and that victims should never be ashamed of being targeted by people they trusted. The new relationship dynamics in my family required clear boundaries and expectations that had never existed before. I created what I called a family constitution that outlined expectations for respect, honesty, and communication. Financial support would be provided through formal loan agreements with clear repayment schedules, and emergency assistance would require transparency and documentation. "I love you, David, but I will never again confuse love with enabling," I explained when we discussed the new boundaries. "If you need help, you can ask for it honestly, but you cannot manipulate or pressure me into providing support." The broader impact of my case extended beyond our family to influence policy and legislation. Patricia Wells used the evidence from my case to support stronger elder abuse laws in Colorado, including stricter licensing requirements for financial advisors working with seniors and enhanced penalties for family members who exploit elderly relatives. Local banks implemented new protocols for protecting elderly customers from financial manipulation, including mandatory waiting periods for large transfers and enhanced identity verification for account changes involving seniors. My testimony helped convince the legislature to strengthen protections for vulnerable adults and increase funding for elder abuse investigations. But the most important change was personal. I had learned to differentiate between genuine needs and manipulation tactics, to recognize when my desire to help was being exploited, and to understand that protecting myself was not selfish but necessary for being able to genuinely help others. 6 months after my ordeal began, I was planning a cross-country road trip in the new car I had bought for myself, a reliable Toyota Camry that represented my independence and freedom. I was also developing a relationship with Robert Patterson, a retired widower from my church who valued my intelligence and independence, rather than viewing them as obstacles to overcome. "Becca, you're the strongest person I know," Robert told me over dinner one evening. "What you survived would have destroyed many people, but you used it to become even more capable and confident." My home was finally my own, decorated according to my tastes and filled with people who respected my autonomy and valued my company. I was writing a book about financial abuse prevention, hoping to help other families avoid the experience I had survived. The twins were thriving in their new environment, relieved to be free from the secret-keeping and emotional manipulation they had endured. During our weekend visits, Sarah and Emma would help me tend the garden I had planted in my backyard, and we would talk about honesty, respect, and the difference between love and control. "Grandma, why did Mom try to hurt you?" Sarah asked one afternoon as we planted tomatoes together. "Sometimes people make very bad choices when they want things they haven't earned," I explained. "But the most important thing is that we learn to recognize those bad choices and protect ourselves from them." Looking at recent photographs of myself with the twins at their new school's science fair, where I had volunteered as a judge, I could see the peace and genuine happiness that had replaced the fear and confusion of those dark months. The scared, isolated woman who had waited in the rain that night no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned that protecting herself allowed her to protect the people who truly deserved her love and generosity. I had kept my promise to myself that rainy night I would never again confuse manipulation with love or dependence with family loyalty. The rain had washed away my illusions, but it had also revealed my strength. The criminals who had targeted me were now serving their sentences, and I was living the life I had earned through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and ultimately the courage to stand up for myself when it mattered most. Every morning when I woke up in my own home, surrounded by my own choices and my own security, I remembered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their worst impulses. True love requires boundaries, and real family relationships are built on mutual respect, not financial dependence or emotional manipulation. The story that began with betrayal and cruelty had ended with justice and renewal. But more than that, it had taught me that it's never too late to reclaim your life, protect your dignity, and demand the respect that every human being deserves, regardless of age or vulnerability. If you've ever felt manipulated or taken advantage of by people who claim to love you, I want you to know that recognizing the problem is the first step towards solving it. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish or ungrateful. It makes you strong and worthy of genuine love and respect. Have you ever experienced a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace and protecting yourself? How did you find the courage to stand up for what was right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope my story helps someone else recognize their own strength when they need it most. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it who might need to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories about resilience and renewal, and share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that it's never too late to take back control of your life. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you all the strength and wisdom to recognize your own worth and protect it fiercely. Remember, you are never too old to start over, and you are always worthy of respect and genuine love.